Now Anthony Dowell introduces a tribute to the late Sir Frederic Ashton.
Two weeks ago, a great loss was suffered by the ballet world with the death of Sir Frederic Ashton. Since the Royal Ballet's beginning, Sir Frederic has been its major creative force, filling the repertoire with rich and varied works, providing indelible roles for the artists, and shaping the style and appearance of a company that has loved him dearly. The masterclass you are about to see again shows myself, with Antoinette Sibley, being meticulously rehearsed by Sir Frederic in the final pas de deux from The Dream. Although in later years he somewhat resisted continual persuasion to rehearse his own creations, you can see on this film how the total commitment, fascination, and determination to get things right rose to the surface when tempted back into the rehearsal room. It was this ballet that gave me my first Ashton role, and it was this ballet that gave birth to the Sibley-Dowell partnership. Sir Frederic put us together for the first time all those years ago, and in this film rehearsed us for the last time. To say that I was fortunate to have the greatest of choreographers create on me would be a major understatement. The hours spent with him in a studio, the tailor-made feeling of the finished result, and the final praise when he had pleased that all-seeing eye are times that I am honored to have been part of and that I will treasure forever. I'm one of many whose career formed and grew under the wing of this great man, and I'm one of many who will miss deeply his extraordinary gifts, his cultured presence, and the sense of occasion that he brought with him wherever he went.
The Royal Opera House, Covent Garden. Behind this facade, the spacious new Royal Ballet de Valois studio, in which Antoinette Sibley and Anthony Dowell rehearse with Sir Frederic Ashton.
But I want you to appear, you see. I don't want you standing here while he's looking around and he, he can see you, you see.
Right.
So you mustn't be seen till the last minute. And
It's the pas de deux for Titania and Oberon from his ballet, The Dream.
Right, yes. Not yet. Because he's looking now. He's not yet. Now. You see, when he does this.
And Anthony Dowell passes on his knowledge to two young principal dancers of the Royal Ballet, Karen Paisy and Philip Broomhead.
Really resist here. Whoops.
Do it. Just mark it. There. Yes. Can you get a little bit more? Yes. So it is pulling you that way.
Yeah.
And you're still back, and then when you get quicker, then right. And then here, be careful with this arm. How do you do it? Now, when you're coming up to it.
Oh, I see.
Yes, you see, now you're doing this.
Yeah.
Completely hiding your face. Frame it. Frame your face. Right?
Ashton, as sharp and critical and involved as ever, is now in his 80s. The Dream was created over 20 years ago and has become a classic of the Royal Ballet repertoire. Based on Shakespeare's play, A Midsummer Night's Dream, its music is an arrangement of the Mendelssohn incidental music written for the play in 1842.
That's better. Now lean back as much as you can. Now forward. And don't hide your face, yes. Right. Good. Yes, but you should progress on. You see, you're just from here, well, wherever it is, you're lying back. Now progress. You see, don't just go straight with your head.
Oh, I see. Do a bit
Let your head and your body go a little bit more on the quick ones. That's fine like that. That's good. No, no. That's better. But even a bit more.
After a long absence from the stage, Antoinette Sibley came back with a brilliant return to dancing in 1980 and danced the role of Titania again with Dowell. It was in 1964 that this ballet was choreographed on them, the first creation for the two of them as partners, and it was the beginning of a partnership that became world famous. Ashton, who was then director of the Royal Ballet, had chosen this young couple for the principal roles. So what was it then about them that had caught his eye?
I didn't want an old established ballerina as Titania. I wanted a really young girl, you see. And I chose Sibylle because she wasn't just sweet, you know. I didn't want Titania to be just sweet. I wanted her to have a sort of farouche character, in a way. And she seemed to me ideal, and I'd been watching him all the time, you know. They never think that I'd had or anything, you see. They thought that I'd ignore them, and not at all. I'm always, especially when I was then director, I watched everybody, you see. The potential of somebody. If there's no potential, then I don't watch them. But if I see youngsters whom I think have great promise and potential, well, then I concentrate on them.
Fred, of course, was responsible. It was his eye who saw that our physiques complemented each other, but I mean, it's much more complex than that. I mean, I think one of the most important things is that we hear the music in an identical way. I mean, that's been proved many times in photographs that are taken when we're working.
Proportions are very good together. So when I'm on point, my hands reach the right place. We don't have to worry what we're doing. And the legs, when we're in our best, they're the same angle. Everything is good for the eye. And apart from that, I mean, it's just the thing when you meet somebody, you just click with. Why do you click with somebody? I mean, I didn't work it out, he didn't work, it just happened.
That's better now, yes. Lean away as much as you can. No, you're hiding your face. Right way. I'd like you to get there a little sooner so that you can hold it. Yeah, I best you see you're going out of it too quickly.
The ballet is a simplified version of the play. It has nearly all the main characters, the pairs of quarrelling lovers, Puck, the rustics, including, of course, Bottom, and it begins with a quarrel between Oberon and Titania, king and queen of the fairies, over a little black page. It has the spell cast on Titania, making her fall in love with Bottom, transformed into an ass. And this pas de deux comes as the climax to the ballet when Titania and Oberon are finally reconciled again in love.
Tarira. And hold. So see, that's it. Right. get that right across when you... You're getting your arm a little too high. There.
I'm doing...
You're doing that. You can do that at the end if you like, but at least get the position. The same with you. What did I say when you were doing?
Well,
When you were
we
there,
held the picture, and then we came
yes,
back
that's
here.
it now. Get that.
Position,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. Now, let's see. Then, yeah.
Over
right.
20 years since the ballet was first made, which means that in that time, many slight changes may well have grown up in performance. But Ashton's eye sees instantly what's gone wrong.
And I finished right across there.
Oh, I'm not going up,
Yeah.
so I see.
In his long life as a choreographer, he's made over 80 dance works. So how, in the first place, does he set about the creation of a new ballet?
Well, I work on myself, you see. I play the music at all times. And supposing if I'm doing a ballet score and everything, I only listen to that music or listen to music by that composer. But I never listen to anything else. And I put it on at all times. I mean, sometimes I'm listening and sometimes I may be doing something else, but it's still there the whole time. I mean, I'll come in late at night and slightly drunk and put it on. And any time. And I never come to the rehearsal without knowing exactly the structure of the ballet. And I know the music perfectly. But I make up the steps as I go along.
Well, I always remember this step in the pas de deux that Fred had seen in a dream. And he explained it to us, exactly how he had seen it. And we said, well, it's impossible because I can't get it under with my arms and my legs. We'll have to chop them off. It's not possible. I had to bend under and Anthony had to get me the other side. And it was impossible. And we fumbled for quite a long time. Then he got sort of angry and he said, oh, well, anyway, I'm going down to have a coffee. You sort it out. And there we were left alone with this step. We got it together, didn't we?
They brought themselves and their capacities to dance. And I mean, they're not dead when you're working with them. They're two lively people. I mean, that makes a great difference. It's not like taking somebody where you have to shake and do everything in order to get a response from them. I mean, with certain dances, you get an immediate response. Too much with this arm. You're hurrying that one too much. Yes, even longer if you delay it longer. Yes, so that one sees it.
Yes.
Almost don't really do it till you're down.
I see. So try and go down first.
Yes. That, but I see this arm doing. You see, what's happening is you're smothering them all up together. I know, but I mean, well, you've got to play with it. Play with the music. There, that's better. Even, that's better. Well,
Even the most distinguished of ballerinas sometimes forgets the steps.
I was thinking I'd never seen him at that minute. Obviously, I've moved.
No, I'm usually behind you.
Oh, no, I'm usually probably move. That's what I was thinking. Gosh, that's nice. I've never seen that. Well, how do I get into this then? Oh, I said that way.
Yes.
Sorry.
Step on the right foot. Slow with that left arm, yes. Look. That's better. You see? Yes. Delay that arm as much as you can. Makes all the difference. That's better. And hold that position there. Make more of that when you get to the leg. Accent it more. Get more shoulder arm.
There's an extraordinary and marvellous flourish and quirkiness and angularity about the movements of this pas de deux, which perfectly reflects the character of Titania and
Do that
Oberon.
little bit.
Not human, not divine, but creatures from the half-world of goblins and fairies and sprites. And this particular characteristic, as any other, has to come over clearly in the dancing.
Hold it slightly, yes. You see what you're doing. It all becomes, you see, let me see that position. You see, I'm very keen on the movement of the top of the body. I can't bear dancers who are stiff all the way down here. I mean, it's with the top that you express. Yes, quite different. Yes, quite different. You're a little bit too close, and you hide up with your leg. A bit more. Don't get your arms too far back. Not back here.
Yes.
Yes. It's that. And you look down. Still too far back. Yes, there. You see, it's moving. It goes from up here. Look. Yes. Well, that's more like it. The shoulders are also. It's not just the arms doing that. It comes from the shoulder. Yeah. And the head responds to the shoulder. That's it. That's better. That's better.
Just straight as going right, we'll pick up that.
Tira, tira. still not enough shoulders on it. So you will do this instead of doing that. There. Yes, you get the shoulder into it. It comes from, the movement comes from up here, not from there.
Oh, I see. I'm doing it from there.
The prodding doesn't do any harm. That's it. There, yeah, exactly.
When we get to that minute, and it's so quick,
I see.
we're all thinking, how the hell are we going to get through the rest of it at that point, usually?
It is, in fact, with about 10 minutes of intense and continuous dancing, one of the hardest pas de deux in the repertoire.
Second. After 6 of round 10. Yes, yes.
Yeah, that arm too. Yes, that's a bit perfunctory, the way you... No, it's just been...
Sibley and Dowell went through the long process of the making of The Dream with Ashton all those years ago.
Get there a bit
It made their name together.
That's
And however much it still needs polishing today, it's still a work that's in their feelings, in their body, in their very being. And Dowell, himself now director of the Royal Ballet, uses his 20 years of dancing the Dream to teach the roles to Karen Paisy and to Philip Broomhead.
Really resist here. Whoops. Okay, let's just stop there. Let's just stop there. Now, on this one, Fred wanted it, you know, like a compass drawing a circle. So what tends to happen sometimes is that it starts and then it, you know, goes out of control. What I found helped when we rehearsed yesterday, if you can get in as close as possible so that you can keep her front arm over the shoulder. Then on this you can move a bit more. And the second one actually is easier because it's another grip. And keep that front arm.
This is very much at the beginning of the learning process. Ashton dealt with positioning, refining steps. Even there was little talk of emotions or acting. But here it is far more fundamentally a matter of the problems of how to hold, how near or far to stand from your partner.
And now you're ready for the one which is pushing back against her palm. And you take it out to there and then go through. Yeah, yes. So you've got to find out how, you know, what's comfortable for both, how close you need to be. So just say you come round. Now think of keeping weight here. Now take the arm round. There. Maybe you're a bit too soon. Better. It's a little better. There. Okay. Now.
feed it round, take it out to the side there, so she can now take a good bounce. Ah, yeah, now that's the trouble. That's the trouble. You've somehow, for the second one, if you'll be slightly to do now, there. And you just step away. So there's this, after this thing, you're slightly further away from the second one. Now step back and point, yes, maybe a little, that's not bad. It might, if she, I think it's too far back. Just a bit too far. So it's the first one? Second. Yeah. Take it out to the side for her. That looks better, yes. And also, if you can be as over as possible. She was quite hunched over. Yes, that's good. Or more round your head as opposed to that. That's it. Now, the second one was just the placing for her leg. It's got to just say that you finished. What's this doing?
The very end.
Yes.
When I go to her
Yes. He's got to sort of be like that. So it is behind the arm a bit. Yes. So, Philip, just a little lead into the next. Little brighter for him. Let's just, I think I was wrong. Okay, all righty. That's fine, yeah. Okay, not bad. Philip, how do you find the speed for those? Because it's, you know... That was fast, was it, for these?
Yes.
Because it looked a bit laboured, just a bit. But maybe because you've had a heavy day, so... But the thing to go for is almost if you can catch, you know, go for, the only way I could do it was to actually go sort of for my feet. So you're really, aha, yeah. So you're like, whoop, right up here. Yeah, aha, yes, that's. Let's do the jackknives now again, but let's try the second step for him. Do you know where that is? Yeah. Don't, you know, bash it as you're tired, but just try and get the in-betweens lighter and quicker so it's more, we see what's going on up top. Yeah. Up, better, up. Okay, yep. And over the top, yeah. Aha, yes, I've got that. Now just... good, that's good. Okay, now, okay, thanks. I just got, you know, the magic over the top. Go over the top. Where are you?
Karen Basie and Philip Broomhead have been with the Royal Ballet for 7 or 8 years, and principals for 2 years. They're part of a new generation of young dancers in the Royal Ballet who are beginning to take on leading roles in the major classics as well as the more recent ballets in the repertoire.
Now hold back, Philip, until you can see center. Yeah, it's just not having the right effect. You're getting too white. Karen, can you just take your line? Follow her round on these 3. 1, 2, 3. Now she's going to suddenly change, so you see that. If you're too far away, it doesn't read. It's a sudden...
Too far anyway.
You've got to time it, so you just go across and you do that. So that's thing. Just once again, not going round, but just try and pick up that. 2, 3, 1, 2. Better. Okay, all righty. Now, when you run round to her, a bit bigger, and I think you can afford, I don't know, I can't remember, I'm usually so shagged out by this time when I stand on 2. I think I managed to stand on 2. Then you're quite safe for this. Take this up. A little long, you were a bit early because you had a long time to wait.
Yes.
And what you've got to do is a bit more of
The ronde-jean.
I think, yes. It didn't look quite... He likes the slowness of this, and then as much as you can.
Yes, and then you stand there before you start it. Good, that's very good. Lovely. Now, wait a minute. Is it possible to see this more there instead of being tucked underneath? So there's a line. Not too much, but just there. That's it. Don't bury it in. Just a little bit more. If you do that, it looks a bit contorted, you see. That's it. Hold that, when you come up, hold, yes. You must learn to hold a position. Nobody can see it if you rush it like this. I'd like to see that held at the end. So you've got to give people time to see a position before you go on to something else. Otherwise, it all becomes ironed. Everything gets ironed out, you see. And you must bring out the accents in the music. Ah, yeah. Yeah, there you are. Very good. That's very nice.
Was I? Yes. I was going to hold that too, no? When we do this next one, does that arm come through? Or does it stay... Oh, did you feel me try to push it through?
Yes, I did. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. No, don't really think of that one. It's down. Yeah.
When you've had a role and you've performed it perhaps more than anyone else has, you've gone through every way of doing it and what works for you. You've tried to pass that on to the next dancer so they don't waste time maybe searching. I mean, everyone has to go through their own way in the end, but sometimes if you can at least give them all the different ways, they can choose something over instead of going from scratch.
Okay. It's better, yeah. Okay, okay. 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Wherever you do it, you've got to adjust it to the stage, or maybe the temp is different. And certain things, I mean, it's like a violinist always polishing. You're always trying to tidy up things, make them pure, and make them better.
Yeah.
Yes, it's
So I
going to
played
be...
this.
Yes, that's all right, but a little bit. Which one is it?
It's that hand back one.
You can walk backwards
Yes,
before I
yeah,
go
yeah,
forwards.
exactly. Always go backwards before you can go forwards, my dear.
The big lift, which is I think a 9.
That's right. That's it, right. Yes. Quite different. Yeah. Want to do the first one? Which?
I think the right. Okay.
Right. Yes, I'm going to do it because it's over my train. Now, yes, there, as much as you can, you see, without kissing our own hands. You see. Yeah.
Is that cross? Does that look funny if I cross like that
No,
in that line?
not at all.
I should look for the front of my foot, is that right? Is that what you
No, you could cross it a little bit more.
A bit more than I
Yeah. You see this? Whenever you cross your foot, it's better there than here or there. There's only one place in the world, and that's there.
Yes.
Now tender, a little bit tender. Now relax to him. There. That's better. Maybe you shouldn't lift your leg on the back. Yes, put it down. He's got his down, you see, which looks now. No, down. You can't. Well, then a little bit rounder, then, so that I can see it at least. There. Right. Wait. I'm not happy with this hand here. Somehow, I wonder if
This one?
this one.
Maybe no choreographer can ever be totally happy, even with the greatest of dancers, and with what looks to us like perfection. Between the idea in his mind and the reality lies the shadow.
Yeah?
Yes. Go up, yeah.
Really use up the whole phrase. 2, 1, 2, 3, and 1.
Those are lovely now.
Hold it, hold it, hold it, go.
Now rock, you see, nobody does this. None of them do that. Drives me crazy. And don't keep yourself up a bit higher. No, there. You see, otherwise you just disappear and sees nothing.
I tell you what, darling, can you put me so that I'm more...
You
can't even think
have to be sure.
We're just like on here rather than my bum. It's in my...
Hang on, so where is it? You want to be...
I want to be...
Oh, yeah.
Yes, because otherwise
Then
it's
if I
too
can
much
finish rock here. And then it's because I finished...
And don't disappear.
Yeah. No, that's easy.
Is that right?
Yeah, I'll do one more. Rock.
To me, you have your body to express, so you don't have words, and so therefore I ooze out every bit of expressionism out of their bodies to convey what I want. Don't just be, your head is gone. Keep your head to the public.
of that programme.
The life and work of the great choreographer who died last month, Sir Frederic Ashton.
For more than 50 years, the works of Sir Frederic Ashton have developed the style of generations of dancers and delighted their audiences. This most English of choreographers had a real flair for comedy. Here he dances with Moira Shearer in the tango from his own ballet, Facade. Frederic Ashton was born in South America in September 1904. At the age of 15, he was sent to England to complete his education. As a young man, he went into an office in the City of London, but he was already determined to be a dancer.
Well, I started to know him when he was a very young boy, and he was oddly enough living in the same square in London as I was. His family just come from South America, and they took a house in the square by extraordinary coincidence. And I used to see this young boy about. And then I went to Madame Rambert's school, and I met him there.
He was very neat feet, and very fast, and a lovely jump. I mean, enormous ballon. He would get off the ground. He bounced like a ball. It was lovely, and very light. And of course, he had marvellous insteps. He had much better insteps than any of the women in the company. But he didn't really have a dancer's physique, Fred. He had a sort of, I don't know what you could call it, because he carried himself very well in those days and had very sort of noble bearing when he came on the stage.
But Marie Rambert discovered other gifts in Ashton.
I mean, she dug talent out of people. I mean, she dug choreography out of Fred because he didn't have any intention of being a choreographer. And she made him.
And this is one of his very earliest works for Marie Rambert, Mars and Venus, created in 1929.
I worked in 14 works of his during the time that he was working there, and each one of them was so different. You know, he used modern music, he used classical music, he used romantic music. He used quite a lot of French music of that time. And his creation, he had so many ideas. They just poured out of him.
There are certain things in his choreography that, to me, were always a part of him. And the ballets that he choreographed for me originally, you see, always had a combination. They were based on pure classical, the technique, very difficult things. He used to challenge me. He loved to challenge me. And then there would be some other aspect, should I say grafted over jazz or something else that he had been and seen and was influenced by, for instance, in the polka in Facade. that was on all the old music hall jokes.
Bright as a seedman's packet, with Zinnia's cat's chin, is Mrs. Marigold's jacket, as she gapes at the indoor still, where a thorn in a box of the sailor, blue as the decks of the sea. Nelson awoke, crowed like the coxswain, back to the dust sank he, and Robinson Crusoe, the bright and foxy beer, when he finds fresh eyes and a negress smiles, the foxy doxy dear. As they watch me dance the polka, said Mr. Work like a bear, in my top hat and a whiskers that, tra-la-la-la-la, the hair. Tra-la-la-la-la, tra-la-la-la-la, tra-la-la-la-la.
In 1928, Ashton went to Paris, where he was accepted into the company being formed by the great choreographer Bronislava Nijinská.
I think she had a great influence on English choreography and on Ashton because he'd worked with her, and I know she influenced me. So we have quite a lot to thank her for.
After a year in Paris, Ashton returned to London, and in 1935 he joined the Vic Wells Ballet, founded by Ninette de Valois and based at the Sadler's Wells Theatre.
Because you see, the whole idea of the Wells at that time was to build up a company where they could earn their livings. It was very important we got something stable in the form of an orchestra, a theatre, and a company. And naturally, one looked out for all the talent that was working. Admirable as the work did the Mercury, they couldn't give them a livelihood. And I was looking out to help all those people as well as the ones we found ourselves. And Fred was right at the top of the list, understandably.
But both the dancers and the young choreographer had to look outside the Vic Wells for work to increase the small wages de Valois could afford to pay them.
I think he was a great professional. Because you see, when you're in the commercial theatre, everything had to be, if they said at a certain time, the curtain must go up at a certain time, it had to go up. So I think the discipline and also often of having to improvise or change one's plans quickly, which I think is wonderful experience. And of course, you see, I think people forget the great help Charles B. Cochrane, was to Fred, because at that time he was, shall we say, considered, I think they referred to him as the greatest showman. And so he immediately, if we think back, noticed Fred's potential. And whenever possible, he asked him to do work for either the revues or the cabaret at the old Trocadero. And Fred was so wonderful because that's when he would ease his friends, the dancers, in.
There really was a period when there was a party every night somewhere. And of course it was that period of bottle parties, you see. And you could almost get into any party even if you didn't know the hosts and hostesses, as long as you had a bottle of gin in your pocket or a bottle of whiskey in your pocket. And of course people got wildly drunk too, because as a result of everybody bringing a bottle, everybody was mixing drinks, because they were all different things. So it was quite a time, that. And they had, you know, theme parties. My favourite one was they gave, one of those mad prophets said the world was going to end on such and such a date. And some friends of mine gave a party, and they sent out black bordered, like funeral cards, saying you were invited to an end-of-the-world party on Monday, March the 5th, or whatever this character said it was, you know. And you please come dressed as you would wish to meet your maker. You see. I remember Fred always wore, he had a great thing about one of his favourite flowers was gardenias. And so he always had gardenias somewhere, and a straw boater was the other thing. So when he went to the end of the world party, he wore a black straw boater with a widow's veil on it, because it was in mourning for the end of the world. And he never really did a whole costume. He used to do very amusing things like filling his pockets with something that overflowed and floated about, you know, on his suit. Go in an ordinary suit and then sort of trim it up. He had a frightfully ingenious eye for that kind of thing. It's extraordinary.
I, of course, at the beginning, too, I was overwhelmed by the way he talked about houses, not only architecture, but the way they should be furnished. And I learned how you don't put a settee at a certain angle, you put it straight to the wall, and I took that all in. I mean, coming from the suburbs, I drank it in avidly, you know, and then he used to go and stay at grand houses, because he was always surrounded by people who were very fond of him and took to him, and he would go away, and quite rightly, with his great elegance and style, he should be, quite right. And he would come back and tell me wonderful stories, and in the dressing room we'd hear about the houses. And I remember the first time I ever heard half the things of new fashioning. And I remember when furniture was painted white. I practically ruined the little suburban house I lived in, because I went back and painted everything white, the chairs, the chest of drawers, and they were stuck them for years white. But I thought, if Sir Frederic says that, that's for real, we must do that.
Leslie Edwards was just one of a close group of colleagues at Sadler's Wells.
Constant Lambert was the backbone of everything to do with the ballets at that time. I mean, I entirely relied on his advice about composers, everything. And he did collect all the composers round as we used in the 30s. And he had a great influence on Ashton, very strong and very good one, and led him in the direction of many of the composers he used, until Ashton was assured enough to know what he wanted himself. Ashton was extremely musical, but he wasn't a musician. He didn't play the piano or anything like that. But he was musical by nature, which is a different thing.
Ashton and Lambert were both to be inspired by a young dancer with a very special quality, Margot Fontaine.
I stood with her in class, and I thought, why can't it be so simple for me to do that movement? Everything came so... She said it didn't, but it did. It came very easily to her. She had this beautiful softness, and she had to work very hard on her strength. And when she first did her Sleeping Beauty, I thought, she's a pearl, not a diamond. But Fred said to her, you have to be a diamond. And she became one by hard work.
I was 15. I didn't even know what a choreographer was, in fact, when I first had a rehearsal with him. And suddenly this marvelous person, he was incredibly plastic. His own movement was something that nobody could imitate. It's something people don't realize now, I think, that he himself had this extraordinary ability to sort of move his body around and swoop and turn and everything. And we would try rather helplessly to copy what he was doing. And it was a great experience. In fact, I now realize the most extraordinary experience to have started my life, my first choreographer, being this great genius. I think he was a genius from the start, because when he would do those early ballets, Les Patinelles, Rendezvous, all those things, the choreography just seemed to sort of pour out of him like that. He would come to the rehearsal looking a bit worried, and I hadn't an idea in my head. And it would just pour out, these steps, this everything. It seemed to flow so easily, and always so It's so delightful. Everything in his choreography was something that everybody could enjoy.
Everybody would say that he created the English classical style, and that is true. But as I say, when working with somebody like Fontaine, as he did so often, he was always trying to bring out the Pavlova in Fontaine, and that first impression that it had all those years ago as a boy of Pavlova never left him. And we used to talk a great deal about Pavlova quite often. He used to get very annoyed with me because I used to say, yes, but Pavlova was like this, and he would say, you don't know, you never saw her, you know. But I felt through him that I had seen her, and I knew her very well. I knew her excitement that she caused on the stage.
Ashton had steadily built his reputation during the 30s, but English fans still judged their homegrown ballet company against the standards of the visiting Russians.
Before the war, one has to remember that the Sadler's Wells Ballet, as it was then called, only had about 1.5 performances a week for a few weeks in the year up in Islington, and not a lot of people went. Fred was well known in the English ballet circle, but not nearly as well known as the Russian dancers and choreographers. During the war, my friend Ronald Crichton, the music critic, wrote a piece saying that Fred's Dante Sonata, which was really his reaction to the horrors and hell of war, was much better as a use of music in an abstract ballet than Massine's famous symphonic ballets. And the editor told Ronald, it may be true, but we can't print it because nobody would believe it. Massine was that much above any English choreographer. Fred changed all that.
One of the things about being with Ashton through those war years, because, you know, one lived very closely, you were always sort of in the same digs or in the same hostels or requisitioned houses or something, that we always carried gramophones with us, good old-fashioned wind-up gramophones and 78-inch film discs, whatever they were called. And this reminds me mostly of symphonic because we were in Manchester, I think, when I first heard it, and we had the gramophone in the dressing room. So you had this record playing over and over and over again all day long. Every time you were in your dressing room, the thing was going, and if somebody was winding it up, then there'd be another gramophone back at the digs where you'd listen to it again. And we listened for hours on end to this music of symphonic variations. And right from the word go, he said, now you see, the boys are the orchestra and the girls are the piano.
The designer of symphonic variations, as of so many of Ashton's ballets, was Sophie Fedorovich, a Russian refugee who had come to London after a spell as a taxi driver in Paris. She became Ashton's closest friend.
Sophie Fedorovich, his favorite designer, was just as downright and courageous and outspoken, as Fred was shy and fearful. And I think she, although in a sense he adopted her, she also adopted him in almost a fatherly manner.
Oh, you could not hit it off with Sophie. I mean, if she liked you, she was so good and so kind and so helpful always about everything. And he adored her work, you see, and she was a very good designer. She went in for absolute purity of a kind of phenomenal kind in design. You've only got to look at Symphonic, it's a perfect example.
And Symphonic Variations was the first new Ashton ballet to be performed at the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden, when the Sadler's Wells Ballet moved there after the war.
Fred, with Madame Duval, was one of the chief architects of that move. I mean, he was able to transfer a lot of his ballets to the larger stage, but generally speaking, of course, that wasn't the best thing for them, really, because they were built for the small theatre and for mimetic purposes and things. The Covent Garden Theatre was too large for a lot of them to come across, although they did go for a while quite successfully, and some survived, but I mean, his main thing was to start doing larger ballets and with bigger quarter ballet and so on.
I could tell an Ashton ballet anyway, and of course there was one step that went in from the early days, and it's always there. Either it's turned around backwards or sideways, but it's always there.
He loved to dance, and he loved to perform, and he loved to entertain.
Well, you know, when we did Ondina in the end, when we started writing it, 56 actually, he knew very well what he wanted, even what he wanted to hear. I'm afraid I was not able to give him exactly what he wanted to hear because I had my own handwriting, my own sound world and all that. But he insisted very much that he wanted tunes. And I spent an entire winter in London, the winter 56, 57, in order to watch dance practically every night, to see how the steps go with the music, what is danceable music and what isn't, So I took it terribly seriously. And he had minutage, just like almost like a film script, where you exactly knew he had 15 seconds for this thing, and then what followed, he would allow a minute and a half, and so on. He had a very exact feeling for how long something can be on the stage, how long it can be interesting, how long it can last.
Undine, by the way, was composed. The music was composed in this room. Covent Garden sent of Baby Grand, and Henze composed the music on it, writing down the orchestration. He didn't write a piano score at all. And Frederic used to ring me every night and say, has Henze written a tune or a melody? Have you heard any melody? Have you heard any tune? And I'd say, I'm sorry, Freddie. I'm afraid not. And then one night he rang very excited, saying he had been speaking to the lady who used to come and clean for me in those days, and she said that she'd heard pretty music all morning. And I said, well, I can't believe it, but I'll ask Hans. And Hans said, pretty music all morning? Oh, he said, I didn't feel like composing that this morning, and I played Mozart all morning.
He ended up being the most English of choreographers. Even if he used French or Russian music, there was a special kind of cottagey, pastoral, English 19th century sweetness about some of his works, which I think typical of Fred. When I think of La Fille Malgarde with its cocks and hens and its peasant lovers, I think of Fred's kitchen and the painted pottery plates.
When he first acquired Chandos, it was a bit run down, although a beautiful house, and he very much appreciated the Gothic proportions of the windows, and little by little with his eye, he wanted to create the sense of balance. And whenever he got a decent amount of money from a job or a film or something, he would improve, he'd sink it all into eye. And one of the very first things he did was to build the lake, and that was an endless source of pleasure for him. And then his love of formality, which I suppose comes out in his classical ballets, is shown up in his love of topiary, which is something that is very apparent in the garden.
He loved the garden. Well, in the mornings, about 9 o'clock, I would take his breakfast out and the newspapers. If it was a nice morning, he would get up about 10:30. Otherwise, it was a little later. And then he would get up, wash, and come downstairs. And of course, that would be what we called homework, 2 crosswords. Sometimes we'd be very good, another time we'd be just the opposite. But he's like a dog with a bone. He wouldn't rest until it was done.
Fred was always particularly attached to Suffolk. His roots were very much here, and indeed his mother was postmistress at Yaxley, and it meant a very great deal to him. The name Fulcher, which is a local name, it goes back a long way, and he was always talking about the yeoman stock. And her name was Georgiana Fulcher, and if you go to the churchyard at Yaxley where she's buried, there are Fulchers all over the place. It meant a very great deal to him. Fred was deeply attached to his sister Edith throughout the whole of their lives, and my mother and Fred moved to England shortly after the father died, and they set up house with the mother. And they lived in very straitened circumstances, I think, and my mother had a job as a secretary and used to help out with the rent, and Fred at that time was trying to become a dancer, and life was tremendously difficult, and I think the bonds between them became very close there. And always throughout his life, if he was ever in trouble, he would ring my mother up, and indeed as a child I remember in the middle of the night the phone would sometimes ring and wake the whole family up. It would infuriate my father, and it would always be Fred about 3 or 4 in the morning saying that he was feeling ill or he was unhappy or something had happened to him, or maybe he just was lonely and wanted to talk, and he'd bully my mother and make her get out of bed, and she'd go round and talk to him, and then my father and I used to sort of have to get breakfast by ourselves in the morning, and they supported each other in the most wonderful ways. But they had the most appalling fits of giggles. It happened more often than not, really, and as we're here at I remember once that I think when the lake or pond was first finished, they got in the boat to go out to the middle, and something started to amuse them, and they became absolutely hysterical and violent giggles and ended up falling into the water and having to sort of swim to the bank and sort of haul themselves out covered in mud, and then sat in the middle of the island sort of going on and on giggling.
In 1960, Ashton created the happiest and, in spite of its French title, most English of his ballets, La Fille Mal Gardée.
Fille was the most wonderful ballet to work on because it just went smoothly. It just sort of came out so easily, and there wasn't any sort of moments where Freddie went to the piano and said, "Oh my goodness, how many more pages," or anything. It was just absolutely poured out of him, and it was the one ballet that I remember was a unanimous success on its opening night. He used to complain if he got one bad critic and say they weren't very good, but he just couldn't complain about Fille Mal Gardée because everyone was a rave notice.
Alexander Grant was very much his style of dancer, demi-character in the male line, and he moulded him into a great many roles and things, because that was a very, very fine demi-character dancer.
Fred's characters, for me, are the best ever made, because unlike, say, somebody like Massing's work, which has nice characters in it, they're very, very set. You can't move in and out of those characters. You can't actually bring much of yourself to them. And having had the privilege of working with Massing, I understood that there was only one way to do it, and he was only satisfied with one way. With Fred's characters, the wonderful thing is that he gives you just enough to he gives you the whole part, but you can do anything that you want with it. You can play it any way, and in fact, having played characters like Bottom, like Alain, and the Widow, I've done them myself different ways, experimented with how you would get a laugh out of this situation, and well, that didn't work, so try it this way. I think that's the great thing, is that you feel an enormous sense of freedom with a cast iron proof that the part is going to work no matter how badly you do it. In fact, that to me is the mark of most of Fred's great works. They're what I call bomb-proof. The first time that I worked with him on as one of the core people in Les Patineurs, I had the difficult jeté exit where one boy is left on stage doing these kind of leaps while all the rest are slowly disappearing. And he kept saying, more head, more arm, the head further back. And in the end, I think he got so exasperated with me, he came forward and grabbed my hair and pulled my hair down like that, so like, tears in my eyes, humiliated. And then we had a stage rehearsal of it about 4 days later. And in between these two rehearsals, I had created my first ballet for the Royal Ballet. We were on stage, we came to this jeté section, and Fred was watching, and he started walking towards me, and I sort of braced myself, pinned my arms to my side so I didn't raise them, expecting another tug on the hair, and he just said, I liked your ballet, he said. I didn't understand it. But
just a year after Fee, Ashton was inspired by a new young dancer from the Royal Ballet Touring Company.
I never saw him make a mistake with a dancer at all. Of course, he knew perfectly well, very quickly, much more than other people. I mean, he was much quicker than most impresarios at noticing where the talent was in a company. And he always made use of it, if it was there.
He was going to do Les Deux Pigeons, and to my great joy, he chose me to do the part of the young woman in it. And we started intense rehearsal, my heart beating like mad. He was so kind and so nice. I'm sure he sensed that one was extremely nervous and also of very tender years and not much experience either. But he was also very, very strong taskmaster. He set things that were a little bit beyond one's abilities that you had to, you know, work to get.
The same year brought another very different young star to London.
I think it was October 1961. I think I had good fortune and I think good brains, good sense to stay with the ballet of Marquis de Cuevas and not to be tempted by American Ballet Theatre with Marie Tolchev, but to come to England at the invitation of Dame Margot Fontaine for her RAD gala. My conditions was to dance with Dame Margot, but she adamantly refused. Another condition was to have Sir Frederic to choreograph a piece for me. And he readily accepted it, in contrast. So, and I had music already in my mind. I was, at the time, very much obsessed and possessed by Scriabin, who wasn't very much known in large concert halls. So, and this was a piece for piano called Poème Tragique. And he was delighted with the idea and started to choreograph for me straight away when I came to London. It was a love from first sight or from first step. It was very easy to work with him. He was very inspirational and I guess enjoyed all my follies, you know.
Fred had always had this idea of doing Marguerite Normand. He loved the music, But I think he'd never found the ideal couple to do it. And when he saw Margot and Rudolph dancing together, he realized here were the ideal people. And it's one of the ballets in which he allowed his romanticism free rein, which he never did normally, because I think he realized that he had two consummate artists who would not overplay it. And of course, everybody was in tears. It was wonderful. And of course, he never allowed anybody else to do it since.
In 1963, Ninette de Valois resigned as director of the Royal Ballet, and Ashton was her natural successor.
I thought, as a director, his greatness was the ballets he brought in. One of the great masterpieces of all time, Les Noces, that happened in Fred's time, and indeed Les Biches. And I think he was very good at seeing the companies as part of a whole plan, as it were, and it wasn't just his ballets or just the classics or anything.
He had very good taste. He could balance his programs very well, and he had, particularly with the women, much more than with the men, he had a great aptitude for bringing an artist out as a person. I mean, quite apart from what he did for them in the theatre, he was extremely good for them, talking to them about their private lives and what they should do with themselves. I mean, I've heard him go for a girl for wearing the wrong dress at an evening party. All sorts of really useful things, quite domestic in that sense. And, of course, the women loved him for it because it was one way of finding out and bringing them out. But I've seen him go up and correct a girl for the way she'd done her hair at a party. He's quite right.
I mean, I've seen at Covent Garden when he was director, and there was a ballerina, a young ballerina, who shall be nameless, who he considered had not done a good performance and had very sloppy feet throughout. And I was with him, and I went round afterwards, and she was in the dressing room, and she'd received all the flowers and everything. And he took the flowers and he threw them on the floor, and he said, "You have no right to have those flowers until you learn to point your feet." I mean, that poor girl, but it taught her a lesson. But there are certain things that he just couldn't tolerate. And as I say, he always spoke his mind on those occasions.
His first ballet as director of the Royal Ballet was The Dream. Again, his observant eye had spotted the potential of two young dancers in the company.
One does know from experience, having worked with him now so long, that he liked his eye to be pleased. And he would often give people the role because of the look, really almost more than the technique or anything else. The look had to be right. And so I suppose, and now I'm supposing, because we've never discussed it with him, that it was that he thought we looked good together, we looked right.
Yes, I mean, I think deep down he liked the qualities we had, but yes, he would have a good time getting things out of one. I think that's why particular people sparked him off. He saw something in them that he was going to bring out, or that carried from the front, and then he would do his magic on top of that.
Couldn't bear you to ask any questions at all. I mean, in fact, got quite cross. He always used to say, just get up and do it, for goodness sake, just get up and dance. What do you want to know, he goes, you know. He didn't like you to analyse anything. No, everything was really spontaneous in that respect. So much so that it was quite tricky sometimes creating something, because one would twiddle around and do something daft, and he'd go, yep, wonderful. And so you suddenly think, well, I don't know what that was, because it's not a step per se. It's not glissade d'assemblée. And so then you'd have this wonderful game of trying to find out what stupid thing you'd just done. And that was lovely. That was lovely, because it was very much done in a room like this, very much created here.
He was terrified. He used to say in later years, when we spoke more, of how he would get on the train. I mean, he'd be physically sick in the morning before coming in to rehearse those first few days, being faced with an empty room, not an empty room, but a room like this with just dancers waiting to be told what to do. He was terrified. But, and a lot of the time with dreams sometimes, and with enigma. No, it was a month. It was like a party every rehearsal. After the muse had gone for a bit, we'd all sit round and talk about it and have a ball. He was the most wonderful person to talk to about the ballet world and about life in general. That's what was so marvellous about him. One got a taste for everything with him.
The Royal Ballet under de Valois had always carefully restaged the great 19th century classics. Ashton was just as concerned.
I suppose I really got to know him when he asked me to collaborate with him over Sleeping Beauty, which is much later, of course, in 1968. And I think that was a very important thing I always felt about Fred, was his belief, his understanding, and the importance he attached always to the classics and the way in which they were done. He always said to me, go and look at the prologue of Sleeping Beauty if you want to know how to put a ballet together. And he used to go back himself, time and time again, as a refresher, just to see the construction of those great works. Because it is so simple and so exposed, it's desperately hard to do, to get it just right. And his ballets are, although they look effortless in lots of ways, and as you're defying gravity, most dancers do really find them very difficult.
He had an amazing knack of being able to tell you that he wanted to see all the positions in the movements that you were doing, but he never wanted to see you still, which is a rather peculiar way of seeing things, but it's very English. It's what I regard as being his true style, to achieve every position without ever becoming static.
Ashton was notoriously reluctant to revive his early works, but in 1987 he gave permission for London Festival Ballet to restage Apparitions. The ballet had been created in 1936 for Margot Fonteyn, but now the ballerina is Natalia Makarova.
Oh, it was such a pleasure to work with him. Unfortunately, I didn't work very much, but enough. And it was really experience. It seems like he knew women so well, understood women and women's weaknesses, and liked them. And he was such a sensitive person. And particularly when he created ballet, he seems like he knew what the image he wants to create, and also he pull out the best from the dancers. Later on, I became to be quite close friend with Fred. And every single dinner, every moment I spend with him, it's unforgettable experience. He has such a charm. Nobody can resist his charm. Really, his charm and simplicity and dignity, I mean, what we can see in his ballet, it's transformed into ballet, transformed into poetry, his ballet. But what I want to say, he has also such a sense of humor. It's so fun to be with him.
He always needed to be loved, and he always was. And he was very pampered by everybody, spoilt by everybody. We loved him. He was a perfect guest, hopeless host, perfect guest. But I always remember him sitting in that chair. He always knew it was his chair, and saying at about 2 in the morning, because he never wanted to go home, "If you'll make me one more cup of tea, Maud, I'll let you send me home."
I think he enjoyed what he called my grand life. He enjoyed it, but with more like a child enjoys things. He had a sort of rather the spontaneity and the light-hearted gaiety of a child, and the enjoyment in a way of a child, I think, and so he was quite uninhibited about that. I remember dancing with him once at a ball at Buckingham Palace, and he suddenly said to me, "Here I am, little Freddie Ashton of Lima, Peru, and look at me now." And he had a pleasure in it without it being at all snobby.
His inspiration seemed as fresh as ever when he made his last great ballet, A Month in the Country, for Lynn Seymour.
Well, like with all his women characterizations, he was very sympathetic towards the person's dilemma. I think he felt terribly sorry for her, because, as he said to me, he said, in those days, you were considered over the hill at 30. Life had ended in terms of any sort of, amour or any more excitement in life. Things were set, and that was that, and finito, there wasn't going to be anything more exciting. And this is one of the things he wanted to bring across in her, but also I think he liked her because she was a bit frivolous and petulant and, all those things that somebody would, and then still capable of falling desperately in love. And, he's a great romantic, great romantic.
never felt safe about his work, funnily enough. Never, right up to the last one. He didn't feel absolutely safe. He had no confidence in his great gifts, you know, and they were huge gifts. I mean, there's not likely to be another one like him for a long while, I don't think.
He was a legend. He was a legend, and I think that people had that kind of awe of him. They were a little frightened of him. Although I don't think Fred liked that. He wanted to feel part of everything. He wanted to feel in with you know, even with the youngest members in the company. He had that magic kind of. It's not common touch, but you know, I think that if the people who are mourning Fred at the moment are not just the higher echelons of the ballet, they are the stagehands, you know, and the lighting guys, and the youngest members of the company.
It was the conversations, you see, they ranged in the time you were with him, as I say, from poets to what his Char had said to him that morning, and what was Sandringham Castle, and beauty of this material he had seen. It was such a wide range, and so witty, and yet so lovable, so warm.
Been in my life for over half a century. We were very good friends. We had a lot in common. We had our arguments and things we liked and disliked, which is only human and natural among people. But there is someone I worked with from the very beginning. And he's the only one who's been with me right through my career in this side of the theatre world. No, I don't think of anyone quite the same light.
He was a very nice person, and I think he'll be greatly missed.
There's another tribute to Sir Frederic Ashton next Friday evening in Kaleidoscope at 9:45 on Radio 4.